Wish TV. All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Don't let high golf rates drive you out of bounds. Save big with the Wish TV Great Golf Club card.
Central Indiana's largest golf club card membership is back for the 8th season with more courses than ever before. Save over 75% on tee times at 27 Central Indiana golf courses. All you need is the Wish TV Great Golf Club card. Cards are valid for the entire 2026 golf season.
Great courses, great savings. Score your Great Golf Club card today.
Central Indiana. Wish TV is now live on YouTube TV and Hulu Live, offering more hours of local programming than any other station. Search for Wish TV or look for CW8 on both YouTube TV and Hulu Live to find us. Watch local news, sports, and lifestyle shows live from Wish TV. You can still catch Wish TV free over the air or stream it live on wishtv.com and on the free Wish TV mobile apps. Wish TV, available in more places for the latest news, weather, and sports. Now, from Wish TV, your local news source. This is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. Indiana's child care voucher system just got a major cash infusion. The State Budget Committee approved Governor Mike Braun's request to move $200 million to the program. The money will pay for 14,000 new child care vouchers. Children who have siblings that already receive a voucher will get first priority. Infants and toddlers are next in line. The governor says he will ask for a total of $240 million per year for child care vouchers in his next budget. That's up from $40 million per year in the current budget.
This investment allows us to reopen access after 15 months of frozen admissions and puts us on a good, sustainable path forward. It marks the start of sustained commitment to keeping care affordable and giving families long-term confidence that they support, that they can count on, will be there. This investment strengthens our workforce while making life more affordable for Hoosier families. When parents have access to childcare, they can pursue other things, jobs, things that they were dreaming about, and not be saddled by the cost of having to consider doing it themselves.
The rate has been inadequate, which is why people have closed. So, what's that old joke about I'm losing 10 cents on everything I sell? If I can just sell more, I'll be better off. So whether the providers can reopen when they don't get a rate increase, but they get more enrollees, there may be some places that with an increase in enrollees. And remember, what happens is the provider of child care can say, I'm getting $150 from the state. If you, mom and dad, give me $50 more, I'll take you. So there's what they call copay or overage. So if the family has the money and the provider finds enough families who have the money to supplement the state, then maybe it works.
Shortly after the governor announced the investment, I talked to Dr. Hanan Osman. She's the executive director of the Indiana Association for the Education of Young Children. She tells me the way the state is prioritizing the vouchers reflects the latest research on early child development.
This is a great opportunity. It opens a lot of, it's reopening the frozen program. So we have been close to new families for more than 1 year, since it's 15 months actually. So after till November of 2024, we were at enrollment of 69,000. And then that enrollment start declining, and on February, the Office of Early Childhood have shared that they have only 44,000 children who are enrolled using the CCDF vouchers. So as of February of 2026, we had nearly to 35,000 children sitting on the waiting list. So this news today is reopening a frozen program. So the CCDF program was frozen since 2024.
How much of a difference specifically does 14,000 new vouchers make?
It will take us, because if we say we're still serving 44,000 children, what the governor has said, he said that we are going to be able to enroll up to 57 children. As soon as we do that, so 200 million. And if we get what we are going to get from the frog that has passed through the Senate Bill 4, we could be really looking to close to 500 million to relieve this. So this is very important to celebrate, and kudos to all the early childhood programs, to the families who have shared their stories. It was a real stories that was told by the people who were affected really by that frozen programs.
Is the bigger story here the 14,000 new vouchers, or is it that the state is now going to accept new voucher applications?
No, they will be able to open the waiting list, and they will be able to enroll 14,000 children. So what they are going to be, based on what we heard today from the governor, we are looking at children who have siblings currently, but those siblings were not able to go to the same programs or even to use the vouchers. So we're gonna making sure that the family is not keeping one child at home. So if I have a preschool and I had a baby, I have a preschooler who has an active vouchers, and then I had a baby, I was not able to enroll that baby into this voucher program. Now will allow me to take 2 of my children back to pre-K, to the child care program, so I can go back to work. So this is first one. Then we have heard also in February of 2026, the presentation by the office that we were not enrolling any infant toddlers. At some point, we had only 26 infant toddlers who were using the vouchers. This is open. Those 14,000 spots we are opening could be those infant toddler children. Also, we are looking at the preschoolers, and we're looking at 3, 4, 5. So the priority was given really to what we have learned for decades now, brain development having from 0 to 5. So we are pleased to see that they are going to open it really first. The sibling one is going to allow the families to go back to work.
At last check, more than 200 child cares had closed in this state specifically because of the child care cuts. Will this funding allow any of them to reopen, or at this point, would those child care providers have to just start over from scratch?
That will be difficult to answer, because in order for them to reopen, they have to look for a rental place again. They lost their leases. So the damage that has been happened, I don't know if this money is going to recoup for those, but I know for sure it's going to recoup for families and children. Programs, I'm not sure if this will allow them to open again, because the children found other places to go. So the program closed is going to take time for us to have the same number of programs opening again. And they might not be the same programs. They might be a different programs. It depends on the needs for the programs at each region. But to answer your question around if these programs will be quick like this for them to reopen, that's not accurate. It takes a lot to reopen a program. They lost the staff already. The staff have found other places to go. Families found other places to take their children. And to establish your business, it's startup for a business, which will require more money from them. So it's going to be very hard for those programs just to open like that.
Coming up, a federal judge orders the state to accept student IDs at the polls. I'll explain why not every student ID will count. Welcome back. College students in Indiana can once again use their student IDs to vote. This follows a federal judge's order that blocks a new state law that would have prohibited student IDs at the polls. Election Administrator Beth Scheller says she could have used a little more warning.
Yeah, a little bit of frustration, because at this point we've already trained every early voting worker They've been sent their training and been trained on no college IDs. I already have hundreds of manuals that are being printed that are already sent off to the printer.
State lawmakers last year passed a law that prevents poll workers from accepting student IDs when voters check in. Federal Judge Richard Young issued an order late Tuesday that blocks the law. At least in Hamilton County, Scheller says nobody has tried to vote with student ID yet. But she says Hamilton County and the other counties in Indiana now accept student IDs at the polls. Hamilton County Republican Party Chair Mario Masalamany, who is a criminal defense attorney, says he worries about the availability of fake IDs on college campuses.
Those are still easily accessible and readily available on our college campuses. So that, I think, is a problem that the courts didn't take into consideration, that when you're issued some of these state IDs, there are a lot more regulations and rules.
But State Representative Matt Pierce, whose district covers the IU Bloomington campus, says that's a flawed argument.
A student ID is not used to get into bars when you're underage because it doesn't have birth dates on it. No one is using their student IDs to fake their way into a bar to have a beer before they're 21. And in fact, if there are fake IDs being used, those are people creating fake driver's licenses for the most part. And they haven't done anything to outlaw driver's licenses as a form of ID for voting.
Scheller says a student ID still needs to show your name, your photo, and an expiration date. And it has to be issued by the state of Indiana. Pierce says that's why IDs issued by state institutions such as IU or Purdue are fine, but IDs from private colleges don't count.
My advice to you would be just to make sure that you have the proper ID, check your license, and make sure that it's not been expired since 11/5 of 2024, and then find out your polling location.
As a reminder, early voting runs until noon on May 4th. Primary day itself is on May 5th. We've made it easy for you to check your voter registration. Take out your phone and scan that QR code on your screen. That will take you to the As Seen On section of our website, wishtv.com. I've written a guide that includes links to the Secretary of State's voter information portal. I've also included a guide to that website, along with updated information on voter ID requirements. Coming up, I ask Indiana's best political team about the path forward for child care in Indiana following the cash transfer for vouchers.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
And welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Lindsay Hake. Welcome back to you both.
Thanks, Glad to be here.
Let's begin with the extra funding for child care vouchers. Whitley, does this solve the problem?
I don't know if it's a panacea to solve the problem, but it definitely addresses it, and it's good government being responsive to its people, looking at the budget, looking at where you're able to utilize some funding to fill this need. We've talked about it on this show time and time again that it is important that we are supporting and having support for parents that need childcare. So the fact that the governor has been able to address this in this way outside of a budget year is commendable.
Lindsay, the state cut the rate at which it reimburses child care providers. That was in addition to freezing the vouchers last year. Does that blunt the impact of this funding decision?
Sure does. It sure does. I think I was on the panel that week that this happened in November, and my child care was really impacted hard by this. My child care provider, and so they cut back, they fired staff or let staff go, and it was a really huge impact for Hoosiers, not just low-income Hoosiers, but an entire sector. So this was a huge push backwards for Indiana, and I appreciate that the child care advocates are so positive for this happening. Yes, it's great to get kids back on the off the wait list and back enrolled. The voucher being made available to those folks and to siblings first is important. However, I think instead of an investment, I reject the phrase that it's an investment for Indiana. I think this was a promise that was left unkept to Hoosiers, and this happened before the budget session. Before the legislative session, where we could have addressed it in a larger, more meaningful way than, say, for example, the frog funding. And so I really think that we could have done more for Hoosiers here, but I'm glad it's happening.
I want to touch on something you both have alluded to, and that's the extensive lobbying from parents as well as child care providers. This is for both of you. Do you think that made a difference?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. I think we had over 300 different child care providing agencies close or shut down or have to shutter due to issues with vouchers and being able to sustain that workforce. And so being a responsive leader and seeing that the decisions that were being made and the way that funding was being allocated was going to detrimentally not only impact children, but impact a workforce, not only a child care workforce, but the workforce of the parents relying on that. And Governor Braun actually deciding we're going to do something about it, we're not just going to talk about it or punt it down the field, is what you want to see in leadership.
Lindsay, we learned on Thursday that Governor Braun plans to ask for a total of $240 million per year for child care vouchers in his next budget. Right now, we're spending about $40 million. At least right now, how likely is it that that's the final result?
I don't know. You know, a lot of folks say that the governor's budget, just like the president's budget, no matter who is the president, partisan aside, those budgets are always kind of DOA. So the legislature obviously has a strong hand in how all of that is handled. That is why we were in the situation at the State Budget Committee on Thursday. That's the frog funding was part of SCA 4, literally the only reason that we were able to move this forward and have the State Budget Committee make such a great decision. So yeah, I really hope that it is as lofty a goal as that. I think that would be a great idea, but you know, there's a lot that gets discussed at the legislature, things that should be funded don't get funded, things that shouldn't necessarily be funded do get funded. So we'll see what happens.
Whitley, during the State Budget Committee hearing, they brought this up. President Donald Trump's budget, at least as proposed, cuts a number of community block grant programs that fund actually a significant portion of the Child Care Development Fund vouchers here in Indiana. How likely is it that we run into trouble there?
I think that with the administration that we have and the leadership of Mike Braun, thinking about his business acumen and how he was able to make pivotal changes within his business to be able to fund any type of shortcomings and gaps, I'm expecting to see that exact same agility when it comes to funding his agenda and making sure that there's enough money within the budget. This would be a historic, I mean, in Indiana history, funding of vouchers and childcare initiatives. And so Mike Braun has always been a pro-life advocate, but these types of policies are pro-livelihood, not just for the children, but for the parents as well.
Turning to the student ID issue, Whitley, could confusion over which IDs are accepted still drive down some student voter turnout this year, even if student IDs are accepted through November?
I think the fact that we've had this back and forth has not been beneficial for the conversation, specifically so close to when the primary is going to happen in May. The fact that we're in early voting and we don't know what IDs can be used for students or what could legally be used, and we're getting that decision today when early voting has already began since April 7th, does not usually lend itself to be the most clear. What I will say is I think that students are engaged and they're turning out in record numbers, and that we will continue to see that turnout in record numbers, and they will utilize whatever tools are available to make sure that their voices are heard at the ballot box. Lindsay, how likely is it this ends up in the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, possibly. This victory for voting rights advocates was, I also agree it was a little late coming. I would have liked to have seen it before, you know, county clerks printed off a whole bunch of guidance for poll workers, et cetera. I totally hear that criticism. That said, you know, our job as Hoosiers is to comply with judicial orders if we're served, if that is affecting our area, and that's what's going to happen. I'm not necessarily sure. Well, we'll see. I wouldn't doubt it if Todd Rokita were to push this to the Supreme Court. It wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I think he's already committed to it, but maybe you have the details on that.
We got about a minute and a half left. Whitley, I want to turn to Governor Braun's decision to endorse 7 state Senate primary candidates who are running against incumbent Republican state senators who voted against redistricting. How much weight will that carry in those races?
I mean, promises made, promises kept. We heard during redistricting that he was going to be supporting people to run against those Republicans that did not vote for redistricting. He said that he was going to do it, and now he's actually following through with his actions and his endorsements. Now, whether or not this will impact the way that the races turn out, it's going to be really hard to tell. as I've stated before, Republicans in Indiana have very, very strong relationships within their own communities. And so unless they've done something that the community feels has harmed them, they're likely not going to vote for an incumbent coming in.
Lindsay, what happens if this backfires? What might that do to his relationship with the legislature?
Yeah, I think it already has backfired a little bit. Some folks who were committed, some challengers who were committed to having direct mail, for example. These fights that are happening in primary mailboxes are really interesting. You've got Mitch Daniels for some, Governor Braun for others, and it's just watching the back and forth is really epic. But I'll tell you, I certainly wouldn't want a governor who has terrible approval ratings right now in the 30s being next to my picture on the mail piece. So we'll see how this turns out. If it backfires, I would not be surprised.
They're not in the 30s.
We'll have to leave it there. Lindsay and Whitley, thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
And we will be right back.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast. You can find it online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.